Well, very interesting question. I think as elections become a way in which our democracy, matures, we find that people just don't vote for the sake of voting anymore. They're just not casting the ballot and walk away and say, well, I've casted my ballot and let the popular will happen. People actually follow what happens to their ballot. They want to understand how it translates into a seat, in how it translates into power. And that's really what we saw in Kenya. In Kenya, we saw people insisting on the power of their ballot translating into a specific seat. And when that was the case for one candidate and not for the other, they thought, let us go and seek recourse in a court. And that's why elections on our continent and elsewhere in the world are in fact going to not just become an issue of settling a question of leadership. They're going to insist on that valid voice of the voter being heard and made into a representative person for the nation. Well, the institutions are working and they have a solid foundation. The sad part is those who are contesting elections sometimes, not always, sometimes for them it's all or nothing. And that's what makes running an election a very tough part. If it was just a question of opening the transparency and conducting a contest in a manner that is transparent to all, and the winner was guaranteed to accept, it wouldn't be as difficult. What does make it difficult is that someone will never accept that they have lost, and they have lost in a very dignified way. They want to find reason sometimes why that has been so, and that's the tough part of conducting an election sometimes. Yeah, I think it's a sad part in parts of the continent. There are, of course, solutions to that. Our electoral systems play a part in that kind of culture. There are electoral systems where the loser or the losing party doesn't have to lose everything, or the winning party doesn't have to gain everything, but there can be recognition that these are voices, or the voices that have voted for these representatives are adequately covered. But I am afraid that we still have electoral systems, unfortunately, on the continent where someone will lose completely and someone will win completely. I think, depending on the history of a country, that is something that can be managed and managed well. In my own country, South Africa, we have a situation where you can have a majority party, but the other voices still get represented around the table. They are not thrown completely away from the table, precisely because of the history we have as a nation. Well, there are a number of things that I think they face. Three that come to mind immediately. One is, when you have what we have at the moment, a large number of people being displaced, it's a problem. That's a big challenge for African elections. The second one is persons, voters in the diaspora. Many Africans are spread in their country and outside of their country. And the only way democracies are strengthened is to hear all these diverse voices. And sometimes we lose those voices. The third thing that is very big in Africa is the way in which challenges can in fact lead to voters inadvertently being excluded. Availability, accessibility of places, distances, tough terrains, just logistical challenges in our countries. Some countries do better than others, but in others, the wars, and the difficulties people have to negotiate make it very difficult for democracy to in fact take root. And these are things we confront, but we are dealing with, and we have to deal with aggressively. In the manner that campaign financing is being adopted by countries, it inevitably creates a big challenge for jurisdictions where it is adopted. Often, I think it is introduced for reasons that are not quite helpful, or not, in fact, rather understood properly. In my own country, we have adopted campaign financing, or party funding as we call it, and we have run it for a year. Political parties are saying, this is not what we want. It doesn't work as well as we thought it would. It's not, the issue is not whether we should have it or not. It's in the manner that we socialize it in our contexts. If we are going to stop wrong people financing elections, I think we can do better and be more specific. In the manner that it is done, it is in fact hampering even good organizations and people funding elections. People are scared to do so because it makes democracy, funding democracy, look quite a bit dirty. And I think that is unfortunately the way in which many of our jurisdictions are painting a picture of campaign financing. It is a good concept. It is socialized very badly. It's a big problem. In elections, if your budget for a year in which you're going to run elections is $100 million US. Let's, for example, for the sake of making an example, it really matters when you get that money. Cash flow is critical. The money can be brought 2 months before an election. You can do nothing about it. Time is critical. An election is time sensitive and time bound. And so our call is that financing of elections must be something we pay attention to in advance. People can't just every day wake up in the morning and say, today this is how much we need. You need to look at how much you're going to need, when you're going to need it, and plan that, put that in your annual multi-year budgets. And that's when you make sense of the work you do. Money brought at the last minute for the sake of saying they asked for 100 million, they got 100 million. No, timing is sensitive and critical. I think that was the sad part of Kenya, and I'll talk about the good part. That was the sad part. I think every jurisdiction has its sensitivities and its peculiarities. When you conduct an election, as members of the Commission, I think you've got to be united. Not united for the sake of presenting a common front, but united in understanding why you're all there and what's at stake. Kenya could have easily caused it could have easily been a destructive force. Many people could have died. And I think that's what we are called to understand, even as we deal with. We have to be clear about what we are called to do for our jurisdictions. We have to work at that every day, not just once when we think of it. And we have to pursue the ideals for which our institutions were created. And so it is absolutely crucial for an electoral management body, its commissioners, its administration with those that are employed to work within that institution, to understand that we do not play political games, and that we are, fit and proper persons who work in those institutions for the good and common good of all, not just representing ourselves, but representing the diverse voices for which we are called to act, and act with the utmost sensitivity and truthfulness. Me personally, I thought I was going to do something that would advance the work. I was a logistician, and I thought it's a nice challenge to set up infrastructure and a logistics network for an institution. But once you deal with this and you realize that an election is the greatest equalizer of a game you could ever get involved in, I was humbled. And to see that everyone that you serve must be accorded the same dignity, whether rich or poor, whether educated or not, it doesn't matter. This is the greatest equalizing thing. And that's really what has touched me personally. And you stop having ambitions for self if you understand, you get to understand that you are called to serve others. In that process, if you love doing what you do, that's your greatest reward. That's what I find. I do a lot of work for common good. I serve for no pay. I do good causes. I support missionaries. I support students. We look at people who are disadvantaged, live in very difficult circumstances. Those are the kind of things I do. I'm involved in Bible colleges and things. So I find a lot of things that in a way complement the work I do, looking after others who are less advantaged than I am. That's what we do. I think electoral management bodies will do well. One of the things we do is to find wellness institutions that we can refer people that work in electoral management bodies. When the stresses hit our institutions, people indeed who spend a lot of time without their support structures, their families, their loved ones who have to spend time with us, there are times when you need to support them. And that really is important. Peer-to-peer support, absolutely crucial, but also dealing with the kind of stresses that come with a job. Close to an election, you can be very lonely. Or you may have a lot of pressure, people putting you under pressure. You've got to have your wits together, and you've got to be true to self. That is the work you've got to be alive to. Ourselves. Someone was asking me this morning, who takes care of you? Because you take care of many others. And I found that very fascinating because, yes, you do get people who look after you, but you've got to be sure that they are not doing so with another, ulterior motive. And that's vigilance you need. That really is it. It's the thing you need, and to be true to yourself. It is because and this is the reason. There are you compete with no one in your country. It's not like running a dairy or bakery where your competitors are doing this and you can do. The people who can help you and give you some advice are often not in your country. Those that are in your country may be those that had gone before you, but sometimes when you talk to them, people say you've already taken a position one way or the other. And so you also want to not have your ideas tainted by anything, especially when you are looking forward to being fit and proper and exercising your authority in the correct way. It may well be that you talk to people who face similar challenges in other jurisdictions, and you relate their experience to your own in your country. Good will not prevail over bad unless the good people stand up and do something. And I accept that we have to deal with challenges in our time. We must never postpone these challenges for another generation. In our generation, this is one of the challenges we've got to overcome. We really have to put our societies ahead of personal interest. And so we must make a concerted effort that the aid we still have today is not one we're going to make a perpetual dependency upon which generations will have to live. In my own country, we don't. In fact, we do with what comes from our own fiscus. And we do so very responsibly, I want to believe. But we must do this. There are still many jurisdictions on the continent, Africa, where an election cannot happen without aid. That situation must be corrected. And that's why there is still room for aid. But it must never be aid that has strings attached in ways that hamper the shackles to be broken. It must be that those who come to office, once they are in office, continue the fight to liberate those that have elected them into office. And I think that's the only way we will break it, to recognize that we are not where we want to be, and that we are called where we sit or where we stand, where we work today, to continue a good fight that others may in fact finish off. There is much we have done, but much, much, much more that needs to be done still, and we cannot rest on our laurels. Come to think about it, we have great sons of the soil in Africa. The Julius Nyereres, the Nelson Mandelas, the Kenneth Kaundas. There are many who, in the most difficult of circumstances, didn't put their interests first. they put the interest of the people they represented above their own. They were even willing to lay their lives for those. That's all we need. We need people who genuinely care about their surroundings and others. And it's not too much to ask. I believe we can generate those people. The choices we make can help us get to those kind of people. Yes, it sounds a tough call. If you have a situation where the people that are emerging, you sometimes think none of them is that kind of a personality. That's where we live today. But the future must get us to a point where Africa, with all of its resources, shouldn't have children that go to bed hungry, that die of starvation. There is enough for everybody on this continent, but sometimes we just don't distribute it well. It gets concentrated in few hands, and that really is the thing that our torchbearers were fighting against. They were saying, let us be because you are. Let me be because you are.